Hi everyone and welcome back. So let's start our journey with the second section. So in this section we are going to talk about Nestjs session-based authentication with Passport, Redis and Typeorm. So you can see this particular section here. In this what we are going to do is this particular architecture. If you see this, here we have a different components: Redis, Passport, Typeorm. All these sections are we are going to play with them. So this whole section is divided into these things. We will write a Nestjs because it's Nestjs, Passport, Redis, Typeorm. So we are going to just add some controller API routes. We will see how we can use Passport with the Express session, how we will configure Typeorm, how we manage the session middleware, and then once you get a session, because it's all about session based authentication. So you log in, you get a session in the cookies, right? Now you can access any protected API routes, then how the session can be fetched. So that will be done in two different ways. In first mechanism, we are not going to store any session. In second option, we are going to write a session to the Redis and then we will validate the session. Because let's say you are running a distributed application, right? You have backend running on different instance, and let's say you have a 500 users already logged in, right? And if your application crash or application restart, their session totally gone. They have to forcefully logged out and then log in again, right? To avoid these kind of things, you can also persist the session on some storage. So let's say Redis, we will try to use Redis. So this section is a combination of using Typeorm for managing the data operations, Redis to persist some state like you storing the session ID, Passport which will be used to store the session, initialize the session and manage the session in the Nestjs application, and then obviously controller and services, and then we will also use Auth guard and this Passport strategies to validate the user login and all these things. So this is a section 2, right? In section 2, if you think what all things are added, here we are talking about how to store the session in Redis, how to work with Typeorm, maybe simple APIs, writing entity, and how you connect to the database. So the first thing we will talk about is how can you set up a platform, because what we need a Typeorm, we need a Redis. So we are going to run all those things using Docker Compose, because we want to run Postgres, we want to run Redis. So it's better, the best possible option for this is write a Docker Compose. So in this video we are going to just prepare our baseline. So we already have just a simple Nest CLI setup. There we will add a Docker Compose file and we will just create a setup so that we can have a Postgres up and running in the Docker container and the Redis up and running. So let's get started. First, we will try to add some dependencies. So here in our project, in our correct project, we will add all these dependencies. So we need to go inside the folder, which is Nestjs session based 0. Inside that, we can just install all these dependencies. So you can see that we have all these dependencies added. So first I did a pnpm install at the Nestjs session based auth, and then I have added all these 4 different dependencies: Nestjs Typeorm, Postgres. These 3 dependencies I need to just work with the database. Then IO Redis, that's just another dependency which I have added. So I will share the project and the whole setup. You also use a Nestjs config if you want to. Nestjs config is just a way to extract the runtime environment variables from the process.env, and here we will start writing Docker Compose. So there is no fixed way to write Docker Compose file. You can write a plain simple Docker Compose and then Docker Compose override. I will try to divide both the files into 2 things, right? One is which contains a very basic information. Then I will also write Docker Compose override file. Okay, so what is the use of Docker Compose override file? And here, because this Docker Compose file is self-sufficient, that means once you do Docker Compose up, I should also be able to bootstrap the database, create a database, so you don't get any permission issues and all. Okay, so this is what we are doing here. This is a tiny script which I have created, and this is the script which can help us to bootstrap the Postgres. So that is all the internals of the Docker Compose. So when Docker Compose creates container, you can also write a bootstrap script, init script, which can create your database, which can create your tables if needed. All those things can be done. I will divide this into two things, Docker Compose and Docker Compose override. In Docker Compose, let's say we'll keep really simple things like just an image. And in Docker Compose override, you can also specify the environments, volume mapping, and all those additional things. Okay, you can see here I have Postgres and this is the volume mapping. I'm using this Docker Compose configuration same across all my microservices because that is self-sufficient. When you do Docker Compose up, this Postgres will spin up with the two database. So we have two different services here, two different containers. You can say one is a Redis and another is a Postgres. So here I will add Redis also in the service. Image is already defined in the Docker Compose. I'm using Docker Compose override to add additional things like environment, volume mapping, port mapping. Same thing I'm doing in the Redis. I just added a port mapping. In the Postgres, image is already defined in Docker Compose file. Here I'm just adding environment, volume, and the port. Okay. So this is my Docker Compose file. I will just do the cleanup and we'll just keep only the things which are required. And I'm putting API database. The important part here is, if you try to see, is the volume. Inside volume, we are passing Docker utils, Docker entry init.d. So this is like a bootstrap or initialization script which will be pushed to the Docker Postgres container that will help us to create databases. Okay, so I have an API database, API testing database. And this Docker utils is a script. You can say it's just a script which is helping us to create two databases or a number of databases based on what you are passing. So here you can see it's creating user and the database. So we don't face any issue with the permissions and all once the database is up and running. Okay, so this is our Docker Compose file. Docker Compose will just keep only image configurations. We'll remove the rest of the additional things. Docker Compose is just a very minimal setup. Docker Compose override you can add to add on additional things. We'll just use Postgres and Redis. Volume we don't need. So this is my final Docker Compose file. And Docker Compose override, you can add more attributes. Or you can say the extended version of Docker Compose file with the more port mapping, volume mapping, and all the other configuration options. So now it's time for Docker Compose up. Everything is there and you can see Docker Compose up. It is pulling up the Redis image because I don't have it. And it has created database. Now it is creating Postgres container. And you can see the script run init script and it has created these two databases. And the username password you already know, API and development pass. These are the two different databases it has created. So next thing is you need to have a Docker desktop. Docker desktop is a simple tool. You can install it on the Mac, Windows, or Ubuntu. Docker desktop help you to visualize the Docker Compose containers. Right here you can see this is the Docker Compose and you can look into the logs also. Here you can see I have two different containers, Redis and the Postgres containers are up and running. And you can also look into the Redis or Postgres through here. So what all we have set up? We have set up a Typeorm, at least the Postgres database, the Redis, and the basic environment setup with the Typeorm and the Nestjs config.